The ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, and laughter mingled with clinking glasses as executives gathered in tight suits and tighter smiles, and I stood at the edge watching her, watching him, her hand grazing his arm. Too casually, her laughter. Too loud, too sweet for someone she always swore was just a colleague. Just a buddy from the office who understood her stress better than I ever could. And there he was, all tailored charm and smug smiles. Leaning close, whispering something that made her lean closer too, and I sipped my drink, swallowing pride with every bitter mouthful as their chemistry sparked beneath the dim lights like no one was watching, but I was watching, and I wasn't alone because across the room near the band stood a woman dressed in emerald grace, her back straight, her gaze just as sharp, just as wounded, watching her husband the same way. I watched my girlfriend with fire in her throat and ice in her veins, and when her eyes met mine, it wasn't curiosity or confusion I saw, but recognition. A quiet agreement passed without words, that we both knew betrayal when it wore a suit and smiled. I crossed the floor as she turned from him, pretending not to see me, pretending she hadn't leaned into his whisper, pretending nothing had changed, and I didn't stop. I didn't slow because the woman in green didn't move either, and when I reached her, we didn't introduce ourselves, didn't speak, didn't explain, because the music began again and my hand found hers and her body turned into mine like we had practiced this moment in dreams and pain and payback, and when we danced it wasn't just a sway, it wasn't just a step, it was a declaration. Every twirl, every touch, every stolen breath aloud. Cry in silence that we were not invisible, that we were not fools, that we too could burn under these lights and make them watch. Her fingers lace through mine and her eyes never left my face, and I could feel her pulse in her wrist racing against my palm like a secret she was daring me to learn, and I moved with her like the world had shrunk to the music and our breath, and nothing else mattered. Because across the room she was watching now, her smile faltering, her eyes narrowing, her arm still around her work husband, who suddenly looked less like a prize and more like a problem. And I smiled, not out of malice, but out of freedom. Because this dance wasn't revenge, this was revelation, and it felt like truth pulsing between us two. Strangers, suddenly no longer strangers. Spinning beneath chandeliers and lies and expectation, the music slowed, but we didn't let go. Not even when the applause began, not even when people turned to talk, not even when I caught my girlfriend's gaze and saw the storm building behind her smile. Because I wasn't finished, and neither was the woman in green, who finally whispered without whispering, "Your girlfriend has a habit of pretending, and my husband has a habit of wandering, and maybe tonight we stop letting them walk all over us." And I nodded, not in agreement but in admiration, because she wasn't just fire, she was the match, and was ready to burn with her all night long. We left the ballroom not hand in hand but side by side, like co-conspirators wrapped in music and unresolved tension, the air cooler in the hallway. But not between us, not with the way she glanced at me like she already knew my rhythm, like we had danced 1,000 nights, and this was just the first one in public. And I felt the heat of something, not quite anger, not quite desire, blooming in the space where her shoulder brushed mine, and the silence stretched soft and charged until she finally said, "You danced like someone who needed to be seen," and I answered, "You watched like someone who already knew the ending," and she laughed. Not bitter, not broken, but bold and free, and it made me want to hear it again, and again she led me to the balcony, where the city lights flickered beneath the night like secrets waiting to be confessed, and she leaned on the railing, her dress catching the wind. And I stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her spine, and she said, "Do you still love her?" And I said, "I don't know if love is what I feel when I watch her lean into someone else's shoulder and pretend she forgot the way I held her this morning." And she nodded slowly, like she understood too well, and said, "I used to love him before. I started counting the times he didn't come home with lipstick that wasn't mine, and suddenly we were not just dancers, we were survivors holding on to each other. Because no one else would." When she turned to face me, the wind caught her hair, and her eyes held something sharp and soft and searching, and I didn't hesitate when I reached to tuck that strand behind her. ear, not because she needed it, but because I needed to touch something real, something true, something not wrapped in lies. An expectation, and when my fingers lingered against her skin, she didn't pull away, and I didn't pretend it didn't matter, and when she stepped closer, I let her, and when she whispered, maybe they gave us the wrong people, I whispered, maybe they made us stronger without knowing a hand. When we kissed, it wasn't passion or revenge, it wasn't rebellion or desperation, it was something else. Something quieter, something deeper, like forgiveness, like clarity, like two broken mirrors finally, showing a full reflection, and her lips tasted like freedom and resolve and the edge of something new. And when we pulled back, the world didn't spin, it stilled, and I looked at her and said, maybe we should thank them. And she smiled, that half smile that said, don't push your luck, but maybe you're right so. We stayed there while the city moved beneath us, and the music faded behind us, and the past loosened. Script just enough to let us breathe, and in the space where pain had once lived, something lighter began to bloom, something that wasn't born from betrayal, but built from what? Betrayal taught us that sometimes you don't need the person who broke you to heal that. Sometimes all you need is us. Someone who sees your cracks and doesn't flinch and maybe, just maybe, dances with you anyway.